So in wastewater, we couldn't be more excited for this project. It's going well. At this point, we are on time and within budget. As you know, the old plant, the bulk of it was built in the mid-'80s. It's outdated, it's old, and as wastewater operators, we spend a lot of time and money trying to keep that operating, and still, at times, barely just struggle to meet our discharge limits. Where this new plant's a much more sophisticated, higher level of treatment that will not only treat today's water to our discharge permit limits, but well into the future. With these MBR filters, we'll be able to treat beyond what is required by the state limits, and as new regulations come in, we'll be able to continue to meet those without upgrading or a lot of change. So this is the Headworks building we're in. This is where the wastewater will come into the plant, into these channels. In these channels, we'll have what we call coarse screens. They'll remove all the particles that are 1/4 inch or larger. They'll be lifted up out of the wastewater, and then we'll have equipment in this room we're standing in to wash off all that debris and pull the water out of it and put it in a dumpster that'll sit right behind us over this way. So after the coarse screenings, the water will flow to these grit removal chambers. It's a vortex grit removal. Essentially all the heavy particles, all the sand, everything like that will settle out in the bottom of these round tanks and then be pumped out, cleaned, and put in a dumpster as well. We're removing all the grit we can because our new process will have filters, and the grit in that can damage and plug them up. And so we're removing to a high level for grit as well as fine screens. On the second floor that's not built yet, after grit removal, the water will be pumped up there and everything will be removed down to 2mm screens, which will really get all the grit, all the dirt, all the garbage out of the wastewater, so it can then be treated. Underneath this shelf you see is where the wastewater will enter, and all the heavy stuff will settle and the cleaner water will rise and go out the higher level, and all the grit will settle in that bottom sump. And then we have pumps in the basement that will pump that up for washing and dewatering of that grit. So these will handle a peak flow of up to 20 million gallons a day. One thing we've tried to do in the Headworks building, because it's a sophisticated building, we've built all the square footage to handle build-out flows. And so we'll just have to add more equipment to get to our future flows. And so that's why we've built some redundancy and some large capacities on the grit removal. Adding in a structure like this after the fact is really hard and expensive. So we've looked to the future, and it'll just be some equipment we'll have to add 15 years down the road or so to reach another level of capacity. So after the wastewater travels from the coarse screens, it'll go through the grit removal to remove all the grit into a wet well. And then there's pumps in the basement that will pump it up to a second story where we have the fine screens located. The fine screens will remove everything to 2mm, and then after it passes the fine screens, the wastewater will flow by gravity over to these treatment tanks across the driveway there that you can see in the background. This is where the pipes from the pumps down there will pump up through this floor up to the top floor. So there's 3 sets of pipes on this side and 3 sets over on that side. Ultimately 6 fine screens. We'll install 4 right now. The water will reach the biologic nutrient removal basins up top. 2 zones are anaerobic, meaning very little, no oxygen in the wastewater. The second 2 tanks are anoxics, meaning a small amount of oxygen, and the last 2 will add a lot of oxygen. And that process removes all the contaminants and nutrients, specifically phosphorus, from the wastewater. Once it comes through those tanks, it'll spill through these cuts in the wall into the MBR basin tanks, and that's what they're starting to form now. There'll be 6 separate MBR tanks, and they'll house the filters that separate the treated water from the solids and the microbiology that treat the water. So once it goes through the filters, It's cleaned to a very high level, and the nutrients are removed, and it's just then to disinfection to discharge to Dry Creek. So on these pedestals we'll have what we'll call permeate pumps that will pull water through membrane filters through these headers here, and then it will discharge into the large pipe that follows along through the building, and then it will travel on to the UV disinfection building. So these are just blowers that are for the MBR tanks. They'll just provide air and have those filters. It'll scour them to keep debris from building up or other things. These large pumps are what we call RAS pumps, recycled activated sludge. So the water is separated from the solids. Well, the solids that are left still have good microbiology and good bugs to help treat the water. So what we'll do is we'll pump them back up into the treatment tanks so that they can continue to treat the water. The current plant relies on clarifiers and gravity to separate solids from the water. With the MBR system, that's a membrane bioreactor tank, you'll have microfiltration of the water from the solids. And it's so small that even E. coli can't get through the filter unless it's torn or has problems with it. And the risk of wastewater going over the clarifier and going to the environment is reduced significantly, because if it can't get through the filter, it's not getting down to Dry Creek. We have some very large turbo blowers that will provide the air to the process tanks out there. They sit on here and will provide air out into the tank to add the aeration. You'll notice the walls have this perforated metal. We'll do a good job of providing some sound protection for the room, because the pitches of the blowers, they're not too loud, but at times the frequency can be pretty annoying to the ear. So we're in the chemical room of the MBR support building, and here's where we'll house the chemicals. We'll have citric acid and sodium hypochlorite, and those chemicals are used to keep the filters clean. These large tanks are for alum. That helps bind to phosphorus and remove it. So if we need to dose to get extra removal, that's what these tanks will be full of. So when we come from the MBR support building, the filtered water comes out the two pipes out of that building and into this building within these channels in the UV disinfection building. You'll see control panels for 2 channels. That'll handle today's flow to where we can have some redundancy and always be sure we're disinfecting. But we also build a 3rd channel into this building for the future. When we need to increase our flows, we'll be able to outfit that channel just by adding equipment. Essentially, the water will travel through these channels, go past by UV lights that will disinfect the water, and then it'll travel on to a tank that will have some pumps that'll provide utility water throughout the plant. And that we don't use there will discharge out of this building. We build extra capacity into this building. It gives us the ability to, in the future as we grow, to just add equipment to expand our capacity without having to build the buildings and all the expense that comes with that. We've invested now for in the future to be able to expand with just adding equipment to outfit the 3rd channel. So all the disinfected water will come into this re-aeration basin, and we'll have diffusers that will add oxygen back into the water, and then the water will travel out these launders and go on out to Dry Creek. What's amazing to me is we can take wastewater, sewage that's rough. No one wants to be around it. I mean, it's bad. And we can take it and discharge it to a level that is safe for the environment. It works into the water cycle, and we have low risk for the downstream users. The technology is awesome. Not only the biology side and the things that we've learned in wastewater, but the technology and how computers and controls come into play to be able to treat water to a level beyond what we've been able to do in the past. And it's just fun being a part of that project.